Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. We're here with our special guest, Ken. Ken, you, in your transition, indicated that you got a degree in vocational services and actually worked as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And obviously, I see that, I've seen that in my workers' compensation career and in my long-term disability career. Um, what vocational insights do you have for someone who has had a career-ending type of medical condition?
Well, one, I think you want to keep your options open. You want to look into whether there are careers out there where your limitations will not pose as big an obstacle as maybe the career you thought you'd be pursuing or were pursuing at the time. There are so many different career options out there. And I think what you need to do is take a long, hard look at what your strengths are, where your abilities lie, but also where your limitations are. Obviously, try to make the most of your strengths.
How do you suggest they go about finding a vocational rehabilitation counselor who can help them with the testing, the aptitude and interest testing, helping them identify a career path, and then giving them advices to actually how to engage in that career path as they're doing their studies or doing, on the job training type things?
Okay, well, if it's somebody with a disability, oftentimes they will have a counselor from what may be called the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Sometimes it's called Access in New York State is what that agency is called. Different states have different names for it. And usually you'll have a counselor that you can confer with, and they either can give you aptitude tests or just in further discussions with them, they can make certain suggestions. There are also different rehab agencies that they can either refer you to or you can investigate on your own where there are vocational counselors that can help guide you into different careers you may never have even thought about.
In the world of long-term disability, many times in a disability insurance policy, the disability carrier will offer vocational services. And that can be problematic because many times I think what they're actually trying to do is to look for a reason to deny or terminate benefits, particularly when there's a transition from an inability to do your own occupation to an inability to do any occupation. Any thoughts about that sort of situation where the insurance company or the disability plan has an incentive to offer those services, but yet at the end of the day, their motive is not necessarily beneficial to you?
I actually ran into that quite a bit. I changed career goals a number of times. As I indicated, I started where I obtained a degree in engineering, but decided it wasn't viable for me. And I pursued a career in counseling, which I enjoyed very much. But during my career in counseling, I was frustrated by the limitations that I felt were placed on me in terms of what I could do with my counseling degrees, as well as finances, what I could eventually earn. And I spoke at a number of meetings before groups and organizations concerning issues related to disability, whether it be non-discrimination or affirmative action concerning people with disabilities. And after my talks, I'd often be asked questions. And while I'd do my best to answer those questions, I was always very careful to caution the questioners they should really consult with a lawyer about their concerns. And I guess it didn't take long before I started to think, there's no reason why I couldn't become that lawyer. So I decided to leave my job and go to law school. And I contacted, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation to see if they would help with some funding for law school. And they would not do that.
Ooh.
They indicated that, we provided funding to help you to get the degrees that you obtained and that you could continue to work in that field. So we no longer consider you vocationally disabled. And As a result, they would not give me any funding to go to law school. They did not encourage me to leave my job or to go, but I felt there was still more I could do. And I had to take that initiative to say, I appreciate what you've done with me in the past, but I believe there's still more that I could do and that I wanted to do with my life. And I had to do it on my own.
So let's talk about transitioning careers twice, because you went from engineering to vocational rehabilitation and rehabilitation to law school. What was different, if anything, the second time you went through this transition than the first time?
Well, there are a number of things. For one, my interest changed. I was really started being interested in doing something only that had to do with mathematics. That's where my strength was, in my math ability. Suddenly, I was switching to a field that was more verbal and relied on more verbal skills rather than my being able to calculate certain things. And, I had the encouragement of a psychology professor who felt that was something I could do in that area and hopefully do well. And then after working for a few years as a counselor, which I enjoyed immensely, I was frustrated because I felt there was still more I could do. And I had an older brother who was a lawyer. He was a criminal lawyer. He was working as a defense attorney. And I used to watch him in court and think, you know what, that not only looks very interesting, but it looked like something I felt I could do as well. So I decided to do that. And, I think part of it was my feeling that not to set limited expectations for people. I think people's performance often rises and falls based upon what others expect of them. And if they expect more from you, you'll do more with your life. And if you expect more from yourself, you'll do more. And I felt that once I was working as a rehab counselor, that increased my self-esteem, my feelings of self-worth, and my self-confidence, to give me the confidence to say, there's more I can still do. And I want to do that and pursue my dreams.
So, Ken, having been a vocational rehabilitation counselor, can you tell us what suggestions you would have for someone who wants to work with a vocational rehabilitation counselor? What should they expect? What should their goals be? How do they know if that VE really has their best interests at heart?
Well, I think most people would have their best interests at heart if they went into that field. But I think a lot of it has to do with somebody doing some serious self-reflection and examining where their abilities are, what their limitations are, how they can overcome those limitations to pursue where their interests are, and decide whether those interests match those abilities and whether it would be viable to go into the field that they think they're interested in. But I would also say that just because something has not been done before doesn't mean you cannot do it now. If you have that strong desire and motivation to achieve. And I'm not saying, don't have unrealistic goals and desires, but realistically set high goals for yourself. Work harder. I think if you believe in yourself, you'll work harder to achieve those goals and make them realistic.
So you talked a little bit about how you ended up going to law school. Did law school meet your expectations, or was it the reality of law where you really met your expectations?
Actually, it did meet my expectations. I was really encouraged and enjoyed the challenges of law school. I felt I learned a lot about not only functioning as a lawyer, but thinking as a lawyer. And I thought that opened a lot of doors to me. And I thought once I became a lawyer, people started treating me a little differently as well. People would often come into a room and when they see me before I went to law school and start talking to the person next to me as if I couldn't speak for myself, or wasn't even in the room. And suddenly they hear I'm a lawyer and they look at you very differently, and they speak and address you very differently. And I think it changed a lot of my outlook on dealing with the issues and problems that may result that I encounter, but also on the way people interacted with me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your legal career, what you did, and what satisfaction you found in the practice of law?
Sure. To tell you a little bit, I was able to complete law school in the standard 3-year time period. And I passed a very difficult New York State bar exam the first time that I took it.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I was very fortunate to be hired as a Nassau County Assistant District Attorney because the district attorney at the time, Dennis Dillon, was a very self-confident, progressive individual who placed his hiring decision on my abilities rather than my disability. So he hired me to work as an assistant district attorney. And I began by going through a very intensive 4-week training program where they taught us all aspects of trial techniques from a prosecutor's perspective. And I very proudly went to court my first day, and I couldn't fit through the swinging doorways in the courtroom. They were too narrow to allow me to get through in my electric wheelchair to get to the prosecutor's table. But after widening the doorways and working very hard, I became a very competent trial attorney. And in fact, not long after I started doing trials in our district court bureau, I was approached by a defense attorney who told me he overheard some of the prisoners talking about me in the pens behind the courtroom. And apparently they were saying that I was a really tough ADA, assistant district attorney, and they hoped they didn't get the guy in the wheelchair as their prosecutor. So I started developing a good reputation. I did a lot of litigation. And in fact, I was promoted a number of times where I eventually became one of our deputy bureau chiefs of our county court trial bureau, where now I was supervising more than 25 other assistant district attorneys.
That's a fantastic story. Can you tell us a little bit more about how changing your careers from a vocational rehabilitation counselor to a lawyer changed not only let's start out with your view of yourself. Obviously, you courageously dealt with the injury that you had. I'm sure it was not easy. I'm sure there was a lot of introspection on your part. But you came to a point, I think, where you must have decided, I'm moving forward. But life is not a series of, not a straight path. It's a zigzags. Can you tell us a little bit more about the zigzags, if you will?
Well, basically, I had to believe in myself. I had to change my self-image and believe that, yes, I did have a pretty good mind. I was intelligent enough to navigate the world in my condition and not only survive, but succeed in what I was doing. And I found that people valued my opinions and what I was doing and saying. And the fact that I was able to go out there and not only help others as a rehab counselor, but eventually be in a position where I was supervising other attorneys. It really increased my feelings of self-confidence, so much so that I think whenever people met me after that, they could see a different air about me, a different way that I, acted and treated individuals and reacted to things that were going on in my life.
We as lawyers, I think, have the respect of the community and ultimately expect that we're going to be respected. Would you agree with that? And to what extent do you think that helped you become the lawyer that you became?
Well, it helped me convince myself first, and then others as well, that I needed to be treated as a respected member of society, regardless of what my physical limitations were, right? That I could still compete with anybody else in the court and still do well as long as I worked hard, tried my best, continued to improve, and wasn't afraid to take chances or make difficult decisions. And I think it really changed a lot about the way I felt about myself. I might add that before I was injured, there really weren't many role models that I could look to and say, you know what, these types of things have been done before, so therefore I could do it. There may have been role models out there. I just wasn't aware of them because you didn't see a lot of people back in the 1970s out in public who used wheelchairs, who didn't have the use of their arms as well. And I think that's changed a lot thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think that helps a lot of people realize there's so much people can do when given the opportunity.
I'm going to ask you a hard question. And that is, in your life journey, dealing with your changed circumstances, what mistakes did you make that you would like to tell people about? Mistakes may not be the right word, but, turning points or maybe actual mistakes, or what are your thoughts about that?
Well, there are a lot of decisions that I made that may not have been the best decisions at the time, but I worked very hard to make them the right decisions. For example, when I was finally discharged from the hospital, I went back to Cornell, and this was 20 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect. There was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus.
Wow.
Now, at the time, that may not have been the wisest decision for me to go there, but I made it work. My first day of classes, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps.
Wow.
Just to attend my first day. So I'm lying in bed after that day thinking, what was I thinking, making this kind of decision and going back to Cornell at the time? But I worked hard to make that the right decision. And I'm glad that I did it. And I'm glad that I was able to complete my education at Cornell, both undergraduate and graduate, and go on from there. So I think a lot of it has to do with, once you do examine the pros and cons of each decision, deciding what you believe is the right decision, and then working hard to make it work.
So, Ken, my last question is, what lessons did you learn, and what would you say to someone who is, has just dealt with either a catastrophic injury or an injury or a medical condition that has changed their life's trajectory?
That it takes time, that, don't make any real difficult or drastic decisions, very shortly after your injury or your new condition. Sometimes you have to live with it for a while and gradually find ways of dealing with it in the ways that'll make you feel good about yourself. And I think hopefully you'll have the support and encouragement from family or friends around you to help you deal with it. But you need to believe in yourself, and you need to convince yourself that you can do whatever you set your mind to. And while you need to be realistic, you also have to be convinced that just because something has not been done before doesn't mean you cannot do it yourself. And I think you get a lot of personal satisfaction in knowing you can still help others no matter what your condition is. And once you devote your life to helping others, it makes you feel better about yourself as well.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ken. To our audience, I hope that you've enjoyed this week's episode of Winning Isn't Easy. Ken brought a lot of great insights and information to us. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like our page, leave a review, share it with your family and friends, and please subscribe to this podcast. That way, you'll be notified every time a new episode such as this one comes out. I want to give a special thanks to our guest, Ken, for joining us today. And I hope you tune in next week for another insightful episode of Winning Isn't Easy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Are you a professional with questions about your individual disability policy? you need the Disability Insurance Claim Survival Guide for Professionals. This book gives you a comprehensive understanding of your disability policy, with tips and to-dos that will assist you in submitting a winning disability application. This is one you don't want to miss. For the next 24 hours, we're giving away free copies of the Disability Insurance Claim Survival Guide for Professionals. Order yours today at disabilityclaimsforprofessionals.com.